Hello, everyone. This presentation is about speculation, and I kind of wrote it as a speculation, so I'll let you know up front that it's kind of meandering, but I'm sorry to bear with me because I think things tie up at the end there, so I'll just jump right in. In 2013, a group of scientists led by Eric Zettler coined the term the plastosphere in a study which found that a diverse microbial ecosystem populates the continent-sized gyres of plastic marine debris in the world's oceans. And I gather, too, that there have been many studies that have kind of looked towards the same things in the years following. Their research in this study found that these plastic-faring microbes engaged in what they call a photoheterotrophic symbiosis, and furthermore that these communities were consistently different between plastics and the surrounding water, which is to say that there are species of microorganisms living in complex association on plastic marine debris, to which they are specifically endemic. So their paper leaves open the question of whether they developed originally in that environment or if they're foreign pathogens, but kind of propose a question of does the plastic itself sustain the life of these creatures? So the advent of the plastosphere, I think, poses important questions for our own ways of thinking about our place in the Anthropocene and the kind of stranded objects of the Anthropocene as which we typically think of as cataclysmic and where life can be developing alongside the crisis that's posed to humanity at the moment. So you can see them there. They're like little spidery things. And there's more here, and there's I don't know too much about this stuff, the side of it, but there's a lot of different creeping things over, and they kind of point to, that soup there on top of that little speck, and this is all very, very, very small, but the kind of going sense is that our current climate crisis has produced, maybe paradoxically, novel ways of living all the way down to the micrometer. So I think in general, in our familiar discourse on the Anthropocene, the perceived effect of humanity, as I said, has been on non-human life and on the planet more generally, has been one of atrophy. But I think ultimately, at the level of our aesthetic imagination, there's a kind of kitsch eschatology at work when we're thinking about our role in the climate. So social media images of the plastic-filled stomachs of marine birds, Blinky from The Simpsons, that's kind of what I'm talking about here. It contributes to a sort of frantic environmental zeitgeist, which I'm sure is very common to us all. So with that said, I'm not sure if either the hollowed sincerity of the clickbait image approach, whose hands are those, right? Or the self-flagellant irony of internet memes are really up to the task of constructing in images a properly political space of thinking about and acting on the profound destruction and changes happening to our planet that's committed by the global capitalist industrial complex. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but for now I'll just say that I think certain formal strategies at work in our aesthetic imagination are grounded to some extent on fundamentally flawed assumptions to do with our relationship, or the relationship between Homo sapiens and the environment, and especially the fate of the planet versus the fate of the human planet. So without making too firm of a claim, I'm interested in the possibilities available to visual culture here in thinking through the problem of living through this environmental crisis and cultivating new ways of situating ourselves in the environment that trend towards giving life. So I'm going to introduce two competing visions of art at this decisive moment in our ecological epoch. The first, the Anthropocene Project, which appears simultaneously at the Art Gallery Ontario and the National Gallery in late to early 2019. Photographer Ed Bertinsky, alongside his visual team of Jennifer Bechwal and Nick DePonsier, elevate our image of the Anthropocene to apocalyptic proportions. So what's more resonant than Facebook's lonely polar bear is the incalculable vastness of industrial pollution and impact. So one of the most operative formal strategies Bertinsky uses often, which we see here, is the delay of true scale. So without the use of the caption, I think I'm looking at a dark puddle in the dirt. until I noticed that that tiny box in the left, or the kind of collection of boxes there, they're really ruins, but that was what used to be a refinery. And then you realize that this photograph is actually close to 1 kilometer wide, taken from a helicopter. So the sought-after affect here is not sympathy, but terror. It's a sublime that bellows, if we don't do something about this, we're done for. So in light of such phenomena as the plastosphere, we can think of the sentiment holding its purchase not to Earth or nature, life, terra, but rather to humanity. It's a distinctly anthropocentric mind frame, however nobly inspired. But as the emergence of the plastosphere shows, for all its catastrophe, the Anthropocene is also clearly the site of a positive trophos, at least if only microbial for now, into which perhaps new and more complex kinds of life will continue to emerge. So I'm going to look to Pinar Yoldash's 2013 Speculative Bioart Exhibition, An Ecosystem of Excess, as something that offers a more nuanced philosophical counterpoint to the humanist fear of the Anthropocene Project. Yoldash is an interdisciplinary artist and designer and researcher, kind of jack of all trades, and she was inspired by the study that I earlier cited to stage a dream of the evolutionary future where, after eons, life in the plastosphere has evolved for success in what, by contemporary standards, is considered a toxic environment. This is from Der Welt, a German newspaper, and the headline there is "Stirring in the Primordial Soup," and the subheading is "Evolution Carries On with or Without People, man." So Yoldash's work strongly resonates with the thinking of the speculative technofemicist writer Donna Haraway, whose ruthless commitment to the non-zero-sum games constantly unsettles binaries of subject and object, nature and culture, and, as I'm going to come to argue, apocalypse and utopia. So whereas the Bertinsky approach seems to emanate from a historicist or maybe diagnostic and ultimately eschatological impulse, Haraway's writing and Yoldash's art think out a speculative prognosis of a non-binary post-human Cthulhu-scene, the eon after the Anthropocene, whose beginnings are already underway. So what emerges at stake in the final analysis is that the Anthropocene contains the seeds both of its total domination, the extinction of all life, as well as its subversion, the birth of the plastorg, the plastic kin of Donna Haraway's Cyborg. And we can ask questions about how each of these seeds have chances for life germinating beyond our brief moment on this planet. All right, so go here. All right, so Donna Haraway, in the opening pages of her essay called Situated Knowledges, The Science Question in Feminism and the Privilege of Partial Perspective, enumerates an epistemology as a sort of semi-commensurable paradigm shift. In the face of phallogocentrist meaning-making, Haraway acknowledges the need for two simultaneous accounts, one of a radical historical contingency for all knowledge claims, and by extension a practice to the same effect for the following, and a no-nonsense commitment to faithful accounts of a real world. For her, all components of this desire are practical and dangerous, and their combination is both contradictory and necessary. So Haraway's interest here lies against and yet also adjacent to theorization, instrumentalization, absolutism, or anything which shuts down plurality and spontaneous potential. So what we might call well-intentioned science, as Haraway will argue, which seeks to expose the blemishes in hostile science, often by that same token lapses into the vocabulary of that which they seek to destroy. So to annihilate an absolute, in other words, is a gesture of absolutism all the same. For Haraway, what we really need are networks of connections between firmly situated knowledge practices, between which we might translate, as she says, enforceable, reliable accounts of things to build meanings and bodies that have a chance for life. That's an end quote. One of these bodies, made famous in her 1991 manifesto, is Cyborg, Cybernetic Organisms, a thoroughly embodied, intractable two-ness of the human and technology. So the cyborg for Haraway is an image of embracing the now of the Anthropocene, affirming the reality of our technodependence in order to destabilize the binary oppositional thinking that is definitive of our current Anthropocenic eon and perhaps beyond. All right, so in her recent book, I think I'm going to skip the slide, Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu-scene, Haraway increasingly leaves the Anthropocene behind, challenging the humanism that plagues both the powers that be and many of her contemporaries. And this is the home run quote here. The Anthropocene marks severe discontinuities. What comes after will not be like that which came before. So I think our job is to make the Anthropocene as short/thin as possible and to cultivate with each other in every imaginable way, or in every way imaginable, epochs that will come to replenish refuge. So the epitome, the refuge, the epitome of the anti-anthropocenic, but importantly not anti-anthropocentric thinking in vogue, at least in Canadian circles perhaps, is the Anthropocene Project. So the stated goal of this exhibition is to capture the most spectacular evidence of the human influence, while taking time to reflect on the deeper meaning of what these profound transformations signify. So he's giving us really a wide-angle frame of what the real world looks like. And in this photograph, this is the Donna landfill in Nairobi, one of the largest in the world, and they do a lot of work with this one. We kind of see one chip of the atrophy made possible by the Anthropocene, which implies, the sort of infinite continuation of this landfill outside of the frame, right? So the garbage that dwarfs these small anthropoi here, and the dog as well, extend beyond the frame, both literally and figuratively. So what do these transformations signify, and what does it all mean? So one thing that the Anthropocene Project does really well is to call attention to the fact that causality is broken, dramatically so in a capitalist setting. We have no everyday stock of the fact that our iPhones stand for football-sized noxious lithium flats in Chile and the resulting deaths of thousands of birds and insects annually, for instance. But for Batinsky, it seems to be a question of reincorporating the imperceptible into our everyday, more so than the destruction of capitalism. So the foreboding sense of the gallery is that we're in the late autumn years of society as we know it, and this is what the winter will look like. We and society being the operative terms here. So this is kind of, I think, resonates with a cliche from Zizek that it's easier to imagine the apocalypse than it is the end of capitalism, and that's something that I think is operative here with Brzezinski in certain ways. In any case, I want to say that this is a anthropocentric kind of zero-sum game. All right, that's going to remain a problem, and it introduces me to Pinar Yoldash. So in an interview, she calls herself a synaptic sculptor, and she describes her activity as an interplay between facts and affect. But unlike Brzezinski, she's focusing on speculation and not representation. So Donna Haraway will kind of put this task in another way, to find a way to go beyond separating the good scientific sheep from the bad goats of bias and misuse. Or in other words, what new can come out of, by and through the Anthropocene that the naive powers of Homo sapiens have little chance of predicting. So in the wake of the discovery of the plastosphere, Yoldash is asking, if life evolved from our current plastic debris-filled oceans, what would emerge? And the result, to quote her, is starting from excessive anthropocentrism, an ecosystem of excess reaches anthropodecentrism by offering life without humankind. So these are kind of Harawayan cyborgs, I want to say, in a way. She does a lot of work with insects here, and there's more upcoming. Just like, it's really crazy stuff. But overall, from the mirth of this great Pacific garbage patch emerges the plastorg, a symbiosis or a making with of organic and inorganic that ruptures the absolutism of the Anthropocene in a way that seems uniquely available to science fiction. And they are really fantastical images here. This is what I really want to talk about. The most visually striking, I think, are these imagined organs of marine living species. So these three structures right here are derivative of recognizable metabolic organs. So the stomaximus is a stomach that can digest plastic. The petrogestative system is a plastic-specific digestive tract, and the petronephros is basically a kidney for separating BPA. So she's imagining what, when life is evolving with all the plastic, how is nature working to subvert the ruins of the narcissism of the Anthropocene. All right, so that's what Stomaximus looks like there. And then these two are plastosensory organs, which work like stereographs, basically, detecting digestible polypropylenes through the plastic-rich pelagic murk. So the 5 sculptures are suspended in these nondescript fluids encased in metal-length display tubes. And the curved sides are kind of refract and magnify both. Oh, there's more details of the plastoceptors. Yeah, they're very tentacular. I love this photo of this father, like, what the fuck? But also that he has a kid. Like, it's such a great image. This is from Yoldash's own website. So the presentation of these organs is itself kind of echoing the tension that's wound into the fabric of the work itself. She's both estranging the familiar and making familiar strange. So altogether, I'm inclined to read the whole ecosystem of excess as a speculative visualization of Donna Haraway's notion of the Cthulhucene. Each is a post-human solution to the Anthropocene. And so Haraway will write in the introduction to Staying with the Trouble that chthonic ones, the members of the Cthulhucene, are beings of the earth, both ancient and up to the minute. I imagine chthonic ones as replete with tentacles, feelers, digits, cords, whiptails, spider legs, and very unruly hair. Chthonic ones are monsters in the best sense. They demonstrate and perform the material meaningfulness of earth processes and critters. So the gesture against the Anthropocene here is not one that maintains the humanist roots of anthropoi, but rather shows up the chthonoi, subterranean or deep blue creatures born anew. The key thing for Haraway is to conduct thinking practices in such a way to emulate the spirit of the chthonoi, situated knowledges being chief among them. But a prescriptive model isn't of interest for either here. I think it could be argued that the chthonoi is an essential towards which we ought to strive, but I would add that insofar as this is true, the chthonic is the essence of non-essence, one that in indifference to our desires goes beyond the human. The only sustainable absolute is the absolute of non-absolutes. But maybe that's the exact kind of thinking that this concept is really breaking up here. Anyway. So I'll just say a few words by way of conclusion. I think for Haraway and Yoldash both, the Cthulhucene is not the apocalypse of Bertinsky. Ultimately, the Earth will not destroy itself. Humanity will destroy what the Earth is to us. The chthonic plastworks of an ecosystem of excess are emblems that have something to tell us about what changes our modes of ecological relation must undergo in order to open up onto our world over and above the anthropocentric determination of nature. This coming community, the Cthulhucene, is neither apocalypse nor utopia, but rather breaks through from that polarity into some kind of new. So I think ultimately what stands true for the kind of Haraway-Yoldash model here is that the success of our species, if we are to care, may lie not in our ability to fix the Anthropocene or capitalism, but to leave it, and moreover to adopt a posture where at every stage we allow ourselves to be punctured and touched, made for and by something that we humans could not have initially predicted. That's it for me. Thank you.